Welcome to our first video here for Chapter 2. We're going to be talking about, that's not the first. Welcome to our second video for Chapter 2. This goes along with the second topic. We're going to be talking about the Madisonian System. We're also going to do some review with the first plan for government, the Articles of Confederation, and a little bit of information of us moving forward to the new Constitution. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, the Constitution. All of you are very aware of the Articles of Confederation, as the first plan for this brand new government was actually instituted during the Revolutionary War. So it was instituted as a wartime government, and you can really see in the structure and shape of the Articles of Confederation a real push to make sure that the states were not going to be placed under a heavy amount of authority or rule, and again, this fear of tyranny and the fact that they were breaking away from that great monarchy in Great Britain. So the Articles were going to have some issues right off the bat with too much decentralization and not enough centralization. And that leads to a bunch of the reasons why the Articles are going to fail. We're going to work on a chart in class to do some comparisons, but most of you should be pretty aware of some of those issues with the Articles. Probably the biggest issue that's going to come out and push us to the new Constitution, of course, is going to be Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion is going to take place in Massachusetts, but there are going to be a series of other battles or rebellious actions across not just New England, but also into the middle states. These attacks are going to force the elites to really think about the state of the country, the government moving forward, the plan, how the economy was going to hold up, and it was really going to spark guys like Madison to start reaching out to some of the colonial leadership that something has to be done to make some significant changes. And the first real reach out there is going to be an Annapolis meeting, which was going to be focused on a discussion of commerce and trade between the new states. But at that meeting, the members that did show up, and really only about a third of those who were invited did, they began to discuss a constitutional meeting in the following summer in Philadelphia. They meet in Philadelphia, this Philadelphia Convention. You got to remember that this is extra legal. This is actually outside of the framework of government created by the Articles of Confederation. It's one of the reasons why their actions were kept very secret. They're going to have a lot of issues early on. They're going to want to try to fix the Articles, but they make the great decision to throw the Articles out and start over. And again, that's where you get into this idea of these elites, these 55 men in Philadelphia, working to fundamentally change the government that had been in power, and the ways to change or alter that government were going to be superseded by this new creation of this new Constitution. Equality issues like slavery are going to present some real issues, and you're going to see a division between the northern and the southern states this early on. They really had to stop all discussion of slavery, or the southern delegates were threatening to pull out. Two major plans are going to come out during the constitutional process, the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan, because really one of the big issues was how to figure out how the states were going to be represented, whether it was going to be by population, which was very favorable to large states, or equal representation with the small states. Small states didn't want things to change that much because they enjoyed a great deal of power under the Articles of Confederation, and the larger states felt that they weren't or did not have enough power due to the size of their populations and their economies in comparison to the smaller states. So they ended up compromising, and one of the things that you need to remember about this great Constitution, it is a series of compromises. And that compromise between New Jersey and Virginia plans is going to be that Connecticut Compromise, which is going to merge a two-house legislature, one represented through population and the other represented by or equally across the states. They're going to deal with the slavery issue, and they're going to tie it to taxation with the 3/5 Compromise. So again, the document and the movement forward with the new Constitution is going to be based on the compromising on some major issues. The original document really doesn't have any specific protection of individual rights. Again, that's going to be a big argument between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists when we get to ratification. We'll talk about that soon. But it did prohibit the suspension of a writ of habeas corpus, which meant if you were accused of a crime, you still needed to be brought forward and brought in front of a judge and told what you had done wrong before you could be held in captivity or in custody. They weren't going to have any ex post facto laws, which mean you couldn't go back in time, change a law, go back in time to prosecute. They had some really strong rules for treasonous activity. They carried over the right of trial by jury. Again, some of the real base rights from the English system, you can go back to the Roman system, are going to be carried forward here in the new Constitution. The right to trial by jury. Also, religious qualifications for holding office were going to be dropped, so you can begin to see here that individual liberties and freedom being included. No bills of attainder, and a bill of attainder, great vocabulary word here, is where you would punish someone without a judicial trial. And I think you can see the connection there between the power that a king would have and the power that this new government would have. All right, let's get to Madison. The Madisonian model, and Madison is going to be responsible for the bulk of the Constitution, and he's very influential in its ratification, which we'll talk about with the Federalist Papers. But again, it's his main ideas, his influences are going to be the driving force in the design of the Constitution and ultimately the design of our government. He is going to also believe that human nature is grounded in self-interest. We've talked last class about Hobbes and Locke and some of those motivations. A quote from Madison at the time was that if all men were angels, no government would be necessary. So I think that gives you a great insight into the inner workings of Madison's mind when he's creating this system. He also believed that wealth inequality was the main source of political conflict in any system, and he agreed with Locke that protecting private property was a key for the stability of any government. He had a real fear of mob rule, or that unwealthy majority basically taking over and using tyranny to overtake the government. And again, one of the big questions that has to come up when you talk about Madison is, how do you reconcile economic inequality with political freedom? And you can kind of think of that in a contemporary sense also. The Madisonian model, again, he was really trying to place as much of the government as possible beyond the direct control of the majority. So the idea of straight democracy is really out the window, and we have a representative system. Again, when you really look at it, he talks about a separation of powers. He's going to separate those powers between different institutions. He's also going to create a system of checks and balances between. So we have three branches, and those three branches check each other in that ultimate quest to avoid tyranny. He was really going to limit majority control, and he did that through making only the House of Representatives the only directly elected office in the national government. State legislatures were going to go ahead and elect select senators from their states. Again, that would be changed by the 17th Amendment, but the original document kept that out of the hands of the people. And continuing today, we have the Electoral College, which basically takes electing the president out of the hands of the people and places it into a set of Electoral College voters or electors. Also, when you look at the judicial branch, you have judges who are nominated by the president. A big thing here is separation of power, again, dividing into three branches. Each branch is independent, has its own powers, but some of those powers were always going to be checked or countered by another branch. Here's a quick visual of the three branches. You guys should be familiar with these. Continuing with the Madisonian model, we got checks and balances because all power is shared. Each branch needs the consent of the other to complete its many actions or jobs. Marbury-Madison is going to be a very important court case. Hopefully you took a peek at that over the summer. That's going to establish judicial review, which is going to make the Supreme Court a real integral part of those checks and balances. The Constitution is very vague, as you know from your summer assignment, when it comes to the courts. Establishing a federal system, again, that was another step that Madison took to make sure that power was going to be divided between national and state government, creating two distinct levels, another check on power. Here's a quick snapshot. This is something you might want to take a longer look at. The three branches of government, it's got the different checks and balances between those three major branches, and this is something that you will definitely see again. The Madisonian model will encourage moderation and compromise, but it also slows change. So if people who are critical of the Madisonian model believe that there are too many checks and balances in place for anything to get done. So sometimes you'll hear gridlock be brought into the equation, but it's a beautiful system as long as there's compromise. Something to think about at the end of this video. Do you think that the U.S. Constitution in its original form is a conservative document or a progressive document in its size and scope? Something to think about. The assignment for this video is a little different from the last two. It's not a Google form. It's an actual little writing assignment, which you will find where you found the link to the video There's a reading assignment that you can take a peek at also that will expand upon what you'll find in your book. All right, thanks again for joining us, or joining me, for the Madisonian System. I hope you got something out of this.